And now, marine weather around Alaska.
We'll start off the marine bit today with tonight's weather, showing this strong low in the Gulf of Alaska starting to slowly weaken here tonight from what it is today and from what it was earlier this morning. Still southwest flow pushing a lot of moisture into the southeast coast, keeping it wet there all the way back into Prince William Sound, as well as into south central Alaska here, the Kenai Peninsula, Manuska Valley, Susitna Valley areas. Showers north of the Alaska Range, dry and mostly clear, a little breezy back here to the west from Brooks Range on down into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta area. And then that flow picking enough moisture up for showers here along the Alaska Peninsula into the eastern Aleutians. Still pretty gusty winds, maybe up to 40 miles an hour out of the north-northwest there for the peninsula, but coming down here for the coast. And drier conditions, weak high pressure here, keeping this storm down to the south. As you see, that just slides east-southeastward here, staying south of the area, so not much of a factor with that. And this one up here staying mostly up in the Russian Far East. High pressure here over the western into the central Bering Sea. Still some northwest breezes, but lighter winds now. Less shower activity as well here, coming down across the Pribilofs into the Alaska Peninsula. And partly sunny for Kodiak Island, hopefully tomorrow afternoon, especially down the southwest part of the island. This low continues to weaken here over the western Gulf of Alaska with clouds and showers over the inland areas, over the area mostly south of the Alaska Range there, and the heaviest precipitation again along the North Gulf Coast and down across the southeast coast with yet another trough moving in and good southwest flow there. Chance of some light precipitation up to the north. And then for Wednesday, still this low still hanging in the western Gulf of Alaska. It continues to weaken. You can see a lot less lines associated with it there. The isobar is a lot more widely spaced, especially on the eastern quadrant of this thing. So still southwest flow in the upper air, keeping moisture and showers in across the panhandle, and a narrower band now along the North Gulf Coast. Up into the Chugach Mountains, Talkeetna is less of a chance there, maybe some clearing in the Copper River Basin. And along the lee side of the Alaska Range, still a pretty good chance of some clearing into the eastern Aleutians. Stays dry here along the west coast. This system now pushing a front, dragging a front over the west central Aleutians for some light rain, fog, and drizzle there, but staying west of Adak and Atka until probably Wednesday evening. And for the coastal water forecasts, central and south coast tomorrow, south winds 15 to 20 knots. Seas up around 15 feet though. And for the north coast, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots with 12 to 14 foot seas. Clarence Strait, south winds 15 knots, but those seas up around 8 feet, and southeast winds 20 knots with higher gusts for Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage. Outlook for Wednesday, lighter winds, south to southeast winds here over the inner channels, 10 to 15 knots. Looks like it'll be strongest in Lynn Canal. And for the south coast, south winds, 10 to 15 knots. North coast there, southeast winds, east-southeasterlies, 10 to 15 knots. Seas coming down now a little bit here, about 8 to 9 feet or 7 to 9 feet. And for Prince William Sound, northeast winds, 20 knots for tomorrow. And the North Gulf Coast, variable winds, 10 to 20 knots. Cook Inlet, light north winds at 10 knots, seas 3 feet. Gale warnings, though, for Kamishak Bay, west winds 35 knots, seas just under 10 feet. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, northwest at 30 with 10-foot seas. Small craft advisories again for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, although much lighter there for Kamishak Bay, down under gale force now at 25 knots from the northwest. Cook Inlet, light north winds at 10 knots, 3-foot seas. Light east winds for Prince William Sound at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And the North Gulf Coast, east to northeast winds at 15 knots. Kodiak Island tomorrow, northwest winds 30 knots. In fact, small craft advisories here for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay for northwest winds. 25 knots here for the Alaska Peninsula, but 30 knots everywhere else off to the east, especially in Bristol Bay. There were seas just under 10 feet. And then for Wednesday, small craft advisories, the Alaska Peninsula, right on up into Kodiak Island, northwest winds at 25 knots. And Bristol Bay looking at northwest winds at 20 knots and seas at about 6 feet. Eastern Aleutians, front Alaska Island, northwest winds at 20 knots. Otherwise, lighter, more variable winds here from Nikolsky all the way out here to Amchitka Island, Shemya, and Attu. Pretty light and variable at 10 knots. And then for the day on Wednesday, small craft advisories, again, that next front dragging across the western Aleutians. They'll pick the winds up to at least small craft advisory levels. Probably nothing more than that, though, at west-southwest 25 knots. Adak and Atka, west 15 to 20 knots. And the eastern Aleutians, northwest winds 15 to 25 knots. Southwest coast tomorrow, looking at winds northwest here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast at 25 knots. Otherwise, Yukon Delta coastline, Nunivak or St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, winds north at 25 knots. Pribilofs northwest at 15 and north winds 20 knots for St. Matthew Island. And then for the day on Wednesday, winds slowly coming down, but still north at 20 there for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island into Norton Sound. And small craft advisories for the Kuskokwim Delta coast there for northwest winds 25 knots. Southwest 20 for St. Matthew Island, northwest at 15 for the Pribilofs. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for the day Tuesday, west-northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. North winds at 20 knots for the central and western Arctic coast, and the Chukchi Sea looking at north winds at 15 to 25 knots, with seas as high as 7 feet. And then for Wednesday, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, north to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots, seas 3 to 5 feet there. North at 10 for the central Arctic coast, 15 knots for the western Arctic coast, seas at about 4 feet. And for the Chukchi Sea, north winds 15 to 20 knots, seas 3 to 4 feet.